Hare Krishna Prabhus. Thanks again for inviting me to your Russian Sangha. Today is the last lesson in our series called Srila Prabhupada Lessons from His Lilas, describing my half dozen or so experiences in Prabhupada's physical presence, as well as what I learned from them. Now, this final lesson is called Prabhupada the Exorcist, Uprooting Mayavada and Sahajiya Weeds. Prabhupada's Mayavad exorcism happened shortly after I joined his Hare Krishna movement in Boston in July 1970. Wow, time flies. That's 50 years ago. Coming in late August would be the largest festival the movement had held to date. The twin celebrations of Janmashtami and Vyasa Puja, Lord Krishna and Srila Prabhupada's appearance days at ISKCON's then one and only farm community in New Vrindavan, West Virginia, USA. Our temple president, Sureshvara das Vanacari, now you know him as Satsarupa Maharaj, the famous author of the Prabhupada Lilamrita, thought it would be good for the new devotees to experience the festival. So, early one summer morning, a group of us set out in a red Ford Econoline van. They were very popular in those days, to make the 10-hour drive from Boston in America's Northeast to New Vrindavan, which is in West Virginia. It's in what we call Appalachia, a very hillbilly, kind of poor area, but rich in natural resources. To give you some background, several months earlier, Srila Prabhupada had faced a threat to his movement, a threat whose impact would eventually manifest at this very festival. While expanding Krishna consciousness in the Americas and Europe, Prabhupada had been meeting some resistance in India. A few unfriendly swamis were trying to prevent ISKCON from acquiring land in Mayapur, the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. Worse, they were spreading a minimized view of Prabhupada, which was affecting the faith of some of his leading disciples in America. To counter the threat, Srila Prabhupada had formed a governing body commission, GBC, of trusted devotees, whom he would train to manage the movement's worldwide preaching someday. After correcting 4 of his misled leaders, Prabhupada initiated them as sannyasis, dispatching them to travel and preach with renewed faith in Guru and Krishna. As the young renunciants toured ISKCON America that summer, the gravity of their offense to Prabhupada began to weigh on them. Mortified at how they had been minimizing his spiritual stature, they began to maximize him amongst themselves, even deify him, citing scriptural references about the spiritual master being non-different from Krishna himself. By the time they reached New Vrindavan in late August, they were ready to deliver their apocalyptic message, Prabhupada is God! When our van finally made it to New Vrindavan around twilight, I slid back the side door and jumped out to behold a sight straight out of the Wild West. Against a white farm fence, the largest of the four sannyasis was holding a visiting temple president by the collar, shaking him and hollering, "Prabhupada is God! Prabhupada is Krishna!" And because we did not recognize his true glory, he has left us and gone back to India. In fact, Srila Prabhupada had recently left America, but not to abandon his movement, but to introduce it in India with the help of some of his Western disciples. But the young sannyasi's presence and loud message was intimidating, especially to newcomers like me, who had come to celebrate a festival and instead felt like we were walking into a spiritual earthquake. Under shade trees, inside the small farmhouse temple, wherever devotees would listen, the sannyasi cited page 59 of Prabhupada's newly published Nectar of Devotion to make their case. Quote, now this is an actual quote from Nectar of Devotion. "My dear king, a disciple has to accept the spiritual master not only as spiritual master, but also as the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the Supersoul. In other words, the disciple should accept the spiritual master as God, because he is the external manifestation of Krishna." Excuse me, I have to take a little drink here, clear my throat. "What's the use of chanting anymore?" cried the singer among the sannyasis, slumped over his harmonium. "We've displeased Prabhupada, so everything we do now is useless." So charismatic was the young Swami that half the devotees believed him. Although Prabhupada's newly formed GBC was present, the movement was so young that the GBC members were barely more experienced than most of the devotees. Trying to end the confusion, the GBC confronted the sannyasis inside the ramshackle temple room one morning, and a debate ensued. Prabhupada as God versus Prabhupada as Krishna's pure devotee. But only a few of Srila Prabhupada's books were even in print by then, and even fewer had read them. So round and round the debate went, with lots of heat, but very little light. And outside, many newcomers, discouraged by all the chaos, were leaving the festival. The absolute truth they thought they had discovered appeared to be disintegrating right before their eyes. The GBC had had enough. They resolved to call Prabhupada to settle the matter once and for all. Now, en route to India, Prabhupada had stopped in Tokyo to celebrate the festival at the devotees' fledgling center there. In those days, long-distance calls were very expensive and even difficult to connect, and the devotees had very little money. But this was an emergency, so the GBC chairman made the call. I think it was Hayagriva Prabhu. As soon as Srila Prabhupada heard what his new sannyasis were saying, he replied like thunder, "Expel them!" Quote, this is an actual quote now from Prabhupada. "They have committed the greatest offense," Prabhupada went on. "There is only one thing worse than underestimating the Guru, overestimating the Guru. They have said, I am God. Therefore, if I am God, they also can become God. This is impersonalism." Banishing the offenders from his society, Prabhupada said they could return if they traveled separately, like real sannyasis, opened centers, inspired people to take up devotional service, and preached the real truth. The spiritual master is not God. God is God. The genuine spiritual master is God's authorized representative. Any so-called spiritual master who says he's God is as good as a dog. So, lesson 1. As dear as those rookie sannyasis were to Srila Prabhupada and to many devotees, they were famous devotees amongst us. Because their preaching threatened the integrity of his yoga movement, he immediately expelled them and gave them a way back as well. At the time, Prabhupada's swift and decisive leadership allowed us to observe the Janmashtami Vyasa Puja festivals in peace. And for all time, he gave us a perfect example of how to uproot a mayavada weed while leaving the devotional creeper intact. Strong governance with consummate compassion. So that was the mayavada exorcism. And now we'll turn to the sahajiya exorcism. While my experience of Prabhupada exorcising a mayavada threat happened soon after I joined his movement, his exorcising a sahajiya threat happened the very last time I saw his divine grace. It was in June 1976 in Los Angeles. Prabhupada stayed 10 whole days then. He had a lot of business to take care of, and then this came up, this sahajiya threat. In January of that year, shortly after I had come aboard the North American BBT as the indexer, a BBT devotee invited me to join a group studying Prabhupada's newly published Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. I hadn't read any CC yet, so I looked forward to attending. When I entered the room, though, I overheard someone dismissing, minimizing the value of Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. So here's what I heard, quote, "Oh, it's just the ABCs, Prabhu, you know, Gopi Bhava is the real nectar." End of quote. That's just what I heard. An alarm went off in my head. Since Vyasa Puja Day, 1972, so that was like 4 years before, I had been memorizing Prabhupada's Gita's verse translations. Although I was just an average brahmachari, memorizing the Gita inspired and protected me. Who was this guy minimizing my Gita? Throughout the readings, I noticed, the only topic was Krishna's intimate exchanges with his cowherd girlfriends, the gopis. I also noticed the listeners exchanging sappy, that means sentimental, smiles. Dopey Baba, I mused. I never went back. That's a pun, because dopey is an English word which means silly or stupid. So instead of Gopi Baba, it's Dopey Baba. Dopey Baba, I mused. I never went back. Pretty soon, I noticed the same smiles popping up around Venice and Watsika, where the BBT had its offices across from the temple. Day by day, the meetings were becoming a kind of movement, inviting devotees to adopt the mood of Lord Krishna's cowherd girls described in the recently published CC volumes. When temple and BBT managers noticed the devotees' service slacking, they tried to stop the meetings. So the would-be gopis started meeting in secret. One group men, one group women. That's how it always starts. Fast forward to June, the month of Prabhupada's visit. Soon after his arrival, the BBT general manager went to him, concerned about the BBT devotees intoxicated with the notion they could develop conjugal love for Krishna just by imbibing the Gopi Baba described in the CC. Prabhupada was quick to condemn this notion. Before studying the gopis' lives, he said, one must be completely free from material desires. Otherwise, there is every chance of becoming a sahajiya, a cheap imitator, which was what was happening. The stage was set for a showdown. So Prabhupada heard about it preliminarily, and then it came to a climax ahead, a showdown. The next morning, as I was walking across Watsika to the temple for breakfast, I saw a BBT friend of mine, an occasional visitor to the CC study group, walking around the corner of the temple toward the side door leading to Prabhupada's quarters. Now, this was a friend, brahmachari friend, who I ate breakfast with every day, but he wasn't walking to breakfast where I was walking. He was walking instead right towards the part of the building where there was a stairway to Prabhupada's quarters. So I thought that was curious. Then I saw many sannyasis in GBC walking the same way. Unknown to me, Prabhupada had just called for all the visiting leaders, along with the leaders of the study group, to come to his rooms immediately. From Hari Shauri's diary, we read why. So Hari Shauri Prabhu, he was the servant at the time. And then later on, he recorded the whole incident in his diary. So here's actually what was going on. Quote, Prabhupada had just sat down in his middle room for breakfast when his Sanskritist, Prajumya, came in, obviously quite disturbed. Actually, Prajumya just ran in the room. He was so disturbed, Prajumya, that he didn't even pay obeisances. He just ran in, just neglected all the protocols, and he just interrupted Prabhupada, who was about to start his breakfast. Obviously quite disturbed, Prabhupada allowed him to come up to his small table, already set out with his silver thali of cut fruits, puffed rice, and fried cashews. Prajumna began to complain about the study group. The same study group the BBT manager mentioned yesterday. He told Prabhupada one devotee was reported to have said that the Gita was too bodily conscious and, quote, external, and that he became inspired only by reading about Krishna's confidential, internal dealings, especially those of the gopis in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So Hari Shauri's diary continues. Srila Prabhupada was so disturbed by this news that the piece of fruit he held in his hand never made it to his mouth. Abandoning breakfast, he went back into his darshan room and called for all GBC men and sannyasis, as well as for several members of the study group. He demanded to know who was involved. Yeah, so this is a very historic, dramatic moment. And now, dear translator, I'll give you a moment to please alert the audience to start sending their questions. Harishari's account of the showdown that followed corroborated what my BBT friend told me later that morning. So when I read all about this in the diary, it's exactly the way my friend who I had seen walking toward Prabhupada's quarters, he told me later what happened. Still shaken from the experience, my friend said that Prabhupada was like a lion attacking the delusions of foolish disciples. Quote, this is the first thing Prabhupada said to them. When everybody walked in the room, in Prabhupada's room, and they all sat down, all the leaders and the people from the study group. Prabhupada didn't say Hare Krishna, he didn't say anything. He said this, "Why are you jumping like monkeys?" He demanded. Then he tried to when they tried to justify their gopi focus by saying Lord Chaitanya recommended it, his fury only increased. Quote, you want to scrutinizingly study Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instructions, but why just the parts about the gopis? Why don't you scrutinizingly study where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Guru more murkha deki kalila shasan, that his guru found him to be a fool and told him he was not fit for anything but chanting Hare Krishna. Why don't you scrutinize that part? First, become a fool like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu before jumping over like monkey. When they still tried to defend themselves, saying they were only studying Prabhupada's books, His Divine Grace then compared his books to a drugstore. Although a drugstore has all kinds of drugs, one needs a doctor's prescription specific for one's disease. This is such a nice comparison because Prabhupada himself, he knew exactly what he was talking about because he was a pharmacist. He had a pharmacy shop in his householder days. So he made this nice analogy. Similarly, although everything is in his books, from the beginning stages of devotional service up to the highest rasas, one must study appropriate to one's qualification. So, quote, first Kurukshetra Lila, then Rasa Lila. First deserve, then desire. Unquote. When I heard that, I knew Prabhupada had protected me by discouraging me from ever returning to that sahajiya study group, which had foolishly minimized the value of his Bhagavad Gita as it is. So, lesson 2. Like any science, Bhakti Yoga is a process one must learn step by step. Unlike material science, though, one's ability to advance in bhakti depends on the pleasure of the Lord within our hearts, who is the very subject and object of the science. As Prabhupada writes in his commentary to Gita 4:34, quote, one must be able to pass the test of the spiritual master. And when he sees the genuine desire of the disciple, he automatically blesses the disciple with genuine spiritual understanding. Unquote. How Prabhupada uprooted the sahajiya weed from his BBT, the very heart of his movement, now serves as an historic reminder never to presume more spiritual qualification than we have. And it serves as a reassurance that our eternal relationship with Krishna unfolds as the Lord is pleased with our mood of loving service. Okay, Hare Krishna, dear Prabhus. Thank you for listening. I'll be very glad to receive your questions and comments now. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. We have the first question is, did Prabhupada say anything about dreams, about your, I don't know, spiritual reality or spiritual master? And is this a kind of a sahajiya?
Wait, we had this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had this almost the same question before. Remember, dreams. Comes up again and again.
Yeah, it's very important here.
Okay. Is it the same person asking?
No. The question is can such dreams be sahajiya?
Well, dreams are dreams. They happen on the subtle plane. But if you've read Prabhupada's Krishna book, you will talk about where Prabhupada says that in Krishna book, Prabhupada says, in dreams, we combine impressions from our awake time. So when we're awake, we might have seen gold, and when we're awake, we might have seen a mountain. So in a dream, we might fancifully combine them and see a gold mountain. So by and large, Prabhupada would say dreams are not really anything. They're just mental concoctions. You can just dismiss them. But, Prabhupada said, if you have a dream about the Lord or the spiritual master, and that dream is consistent with what you've heard from Guru and Krishna when you're awake, then you can take that as something significant. Just like Prabhupada himself. He had dreams of his Guru Maharaj coming to him starting in the 1940s, and then later on in the 1950s also. But in the 40s, when Prabhupada was becoming very discouraged by his family's lack of cooperation in helping him, even with the business, what to speak of his spiritual mission, Prabhupada confided to his trusted servant, Gauranga, that I'm not interested in these people anymore. They don't help me. Of course, he went on dutifully supporting them, but at that time, that's when Prabhupada started having dreams that his Guru Maharaj was coming to him and telling him to take sannyas. Prabhupada told us this. His Guru Maharaj was saying, please come out, please take sannyas. Because Prabhupada was becoming disgusted with his family, and they were becoming not favorable anymore. They were becoming an impediment to his spiritual life. So at first Prabhupada was horrified because he had been a householder all his life, since all his adult life. And he couldn't imagine living so austerely like his sannyasi godbrother friends like Sridhar Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Maharaj and Keshav Maharaj, Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj. So he just didn't consider that in the 40s. But then later on, after he finally left his family, and and then he left this place called Jhansi, where he had a little bit of interest from the Ayurvedic medical college students. And then he lost that. He started having the dreams again. And he told some of his godbrothers that Guru Maharaj is coming to me again and telling me to take sannyas. Would you give me sannyas? And none of them would do that, except for Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj, who said, yes, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, you must take sannyas. And so he gave him sannyas in September 17th, 1959. So that started with a dream. So if we're having dreams of Guru and Krishna, we have to see how they are consistent with the reality of Prabhupada's Vani. because that's what we all have in common. We're all followers of Prabhupada's Vani. We're all his Vani followers, his everlasting Vani. So if we don't do that, if we sentimentally just get attached to some dream, yeah, that could be a kind of, see, what does sahajiya mean? Sahajiya means somebody who takes things very cheaply. Prabhupada describes this in Nectar of Devotion. And he mistakes his material impressions and his emotions for spiritual impressions and spiritual emotions. And in the most, egregious or horrible form, it takes the form of just what was starting to happen at the BBT. That the management was saying, don't do this, because they were getting distracted and they were getting so absorbed in this intoxication, thinking that they were, gopis and Krishna, that the girls, the young ladies started having their own secret sahajiya study group and pretending that they were gopis, and the guys, they were having their study group. And that's how these sahajiya things start. And then pretty soon, the guys group and the girls group get together, and then they start acting out the rasa dance, so-called rasa dance. And so it just becomes illicit sex. So but it always starts seemingly innocently, right? That's how Maya is. She comes in a very innocent way. So we have to be careful of that. Dreams only if they're consistent with what you know of Prabhupada from his life, his teachings, his mood, and his mission. So we all have to become very sincere, serious students of Prabhupada, or else how will we know? We'll be at the mercy of our dreams. So let that be a lesson. Okay, any more?
Yes. Maybe first I'd like to share my personal comment. Sahajiya is very dangerous because when we are not yet engaging our senses with spiritual things, it's very easy to be mistaken. This false enthusiasm or excitement, right?
Say that last part again.
Sometimes we feel some emotions, but they are not really spiritual,
Right.
Yeah. So
well, emotions are emotions. I mean, it's not that they're not real, but usually our feeling, it comes from the thinking. There's three functions of the mind: thinking, feeling, and willing. So what we think about, we become absorbed in. And then what we become absorbed in, we want to act out. So feelings are feelings, but because for so long we've invested our thinking power, because the soul, a property of the soul is chit. It has this awareness potency. The soul is sat, it's eternal, it's chit, it's full of awareness or knowledge, and it's ananda. Originally it's full of pleasure. But now we've invested the soul's potency in matter. So now we've become asat, we become mortal, everything ends. Achit, subject to ignorance, and nirananda, subject to misery. So the whole art of Krishna consciousness is transferring the same attachment. See, because as Prabhupada writes in the third canto, we're just studying this now in Tucson Temple, where Prabhupada wrote in one purport that consciousness is the platform of attachment, because we're tiny sparks of Krishna. So Krishna's consciousness is infinite, it's unlimited, and our consciousness is infinitesimal, it's tiny. So we have to transfer our attachment to redirect it back to Krishna. That's what yoga means, to reconnect. Because we're tiny, we have a tendency to want to take shelter of someone or something. We're investing our love in some person or some philosophy or some activity, But if it's material, if it's just external, then we always get disappointed. It always gets stale, it gets old, and finally it dies, it breaks, or we break. Yeah, it's very important that we purify our emotions. Emotions are emotions. We just have to redirect them back to Krishna. And then they become connected to the reservoir of all pleasure and consciousness and activity. And that's where we can fully blossom those emotions, our thinking capacity, our feeling, our willing. We can do it all in yoga. That's the beauty of bhakti. We engage all the senses and the mind and the intelligence in Krishna. You hear Prabhupada say sometimes on recordings. So we see, we don't just see with these eyes, but we see through Krishna. We hear through Krishna. We taste through Krishna. Everything Krishna.
Yeah.
It's beautiful the way he does that. He's such a great speaker. And then you begin to feel it because he's fully realized in it. So you begin to feel that. So yeah, sahajiya is very dangerous. But don't, in the name of avoiding sahajiya, don't deny your feelings and don't deny your thoughts and don't deny activity. That's impersonalism. But just practice redirecting it back to Krishna, and then we become normal again. We become normal spiritual persons, and we're able to relate to each other as spiritual people instead of trying to enjoy each other, exploit each other. We serve each other. And it's really sweet because that's what's going on in the spiritual world. So we can taste that even in Tucson, Arizona, or Moscow, or Vladivostok, or Kazan, or wherever you are. Yeah. Okay, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And one more question, just a clarification. Could you elaborate or just explain what did you mean when you said that Prabhupada said first we need to become like fools like Lord Chaitanya? What did this mean?
Become what?
A fool like Lord Chaitanya. So,
oh yeah.
so
good question.
What does that really mean?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because it startles you, you know, when you hear that.
Yeah. Well, so a fool like Lord Chaitanya. So is this like, yeah, when the mayavad sannyasis in Banaras invited Mahaprabhu to come to be with them because they heard about him. They heard that he was a sannyasi, but he was always singing and dancing. And so Prakashananda Saraswati said, well, this is not conduct befitting a sannyasi. He should be studying Vedanta. He's singing and dancing, you know, we might say Bollywood, you know, like some kind of sentimental guy just singing and dancing all over the place. This is not, he's giving the sannyas order a bad name here. So, so he invited, he was hoping he could talk some sense into this young, beautiful, you know, glamorous singing and dancing sannyasi. So Lord Chaitanya came, he accepted the invitation. Well, actually what happened was Mahaprabhu's disciple, Tapan Mishra, came and told that Lord Chaitanya that he's been hearing these sannyasis criticizing him, Lord Chaitanya, and he can't take it because he's a disciple of his. So he said, I can't tolerate this blasphemy, Lord. So would you please accept, you know, you go and you set them straight. So Prakashananda thought he was going to set Mahaprabhu straight by having him clean up his act and just become a good studier of Vedanta. But Tapan Mishra said, no, you please have to go and stop their mayavad, you know, bring them to a higher level. relieve them of their impersonal misconception. So Mahaprabhu went, and he just patiently, sat in the corner. That's where he sat. He actually sat where they were washing the feet of the guests. So Prakashananda said, "No, come, you must come and sit closer." So Mahaprabhu, he kind of reluctantly, shyly, this was his strategy, to be very humble, kind of to win them over with his humility, which was real. So Prakashananda Saraswati said, "So why aren't you studying Vedanta? This is what sannyasis do." So Mahaprabhu said this line that Prabhupada said, "Guru Mori Murka Deki Kalilashasan." My Guru Maharaj, I'm sorry, my dear Swamiji, my Guru Maharaj found me to be a great fool, not fit for studying Vedanta, only fit for chanting Hare Krishna. So
amazing.
Yeah. But then they all noticed that this sannyasi, he's glowing. He's calling himself, he's reporting that his spiritual master thought him to be a fool. But he seems to be glowing with the complete Siddhanta of the Vedanta. It's like he's already realized Vedanta just by his presence. They were feeling, because when you study Vedanta in an impersonal, dry way, you become very kind of dry yourself, and you become all dried up like a prune. But in Mahaprabhu's presence, they were kind of like, "Wow, who is this?" Effulgent personality. So he was like so self-effulgent, full of the conclusions, of Vaishnava Siddhanta. Then he began to explain. And then all of his, thousands of disciples, including Prakashananda, they became struck with wonder, and they all became his followers. So that's the kind of fool we have to be. Fool, always, as Prabhupada would say, always the fool before we think of our Guru Maharaj or think of Prabhupada, and we just feel foolish naturally, because they found us, and they're Om Jnana Timirandasya, my spiritual master found me to be a fool, and now he's opening my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisance unto him or her. And so we naturally feel foolish, but then Prabhupada makes it clear also, when we study his Vani, that even we're always a fool before our Guru Maharaj, and that's how Prabhupada presented himself. My credit is that I followed my Guru Maharaj, didn't change anything, and he kindly sent you to me. It's all your credit. He never took the credit. He was totally transparent, either crediting his Guru Maharaj or crediting us, who were even more foolish, super foolish. And so he made it clear that even though we're always fools before our gurus, we have to, someday, the student has to also act as the master, while still feeling foolish before the guru. We have to act as master. Amara gyai guru hanya tare desh. Yare dako tare kaha Krishna upadesh amara gyai guru hanya tare desh. That's Mahaprabhu. And Prabhupada quoted this hundreds of times, recorded in the Vedabase. Whoever you meet, instruct them about what Krishna has said. By my order, you become a guru and save this land. So not on our own account, but by representing Guru, Krishna, the whole parampara. We're ordered to share what we've learned, not hoard it, not say I'm too fallen, or yeah, we're fallen, but that's false humility if we don't have faith. that Krishna and Guru can speak through us. So we really have to become absorbed in their words, their deeds, and then we become fit to act as their representatives. So that's the kind of fool. Foolish before them, but also we have to be compassionate and share with others our great treasure, the matchless gifts that they've given us. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for reminding us of this very important aspect of devotion. Humble, feeling yourself a fool, and giving all the respect possible to your spiritual master.
All the credit.
All the credit, yeah.
Yeah.
And not to change anything. That's wonderful. Thank you, Sureshvara Prabhu. It is just such a beautiful reminder, you know.
Not to change anything, but to always know how to adapt the eternal principles to the ever-changing time, place, and circumstance.
Yeah, according to time, place, and circumstances. And
right.
Prabhupada did it wonderfully, right?
Ooh, yeah.
And what you said also reminded me about that amazing quote of Prabhupada when he said that he would like to have 10,000 gurus in his movement, right?
No, more than that.
And
10 million.
10
million.
Oh, I remember it was 10,000. 10 million sounds grandiose.
It's right, and it's recorded, and actually what was recorded is millions, but what Kalakanta heard him say, I think that's recorded too, is 10 million. Yeah, in Mayapur, right in Mayapur.
Yeah.
That's Prabhupada's vision, not just 85 or 90, but millions. Siksha Diksha, Varman Pradarshika, yeah, the whole world is suffering.
So, yeah, thank you very much for this wonderful association, for your amazing narrations about Srila Prabhupada. And please accept our most humble gratitude and obeisance.
My humble obeisances, and I will be sending, for the information of the listeners, to Sati Mataji a sample of the next series I have in mind, which is Founder Acharya Essentials, which would be essential aspects of the complete Founder Acharya seminar series that I travel and teach with, or now traveling virtually, that I gave in Moscow in 2014. But I have streamlined script versions of that. So I'll be sending a sample and hopefully starting to share those with you sometime soon.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Jai. Ruski Vaishnavs ki jai.